Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick, the heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsom with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. He'll get a first down at the 3. Howe, pump fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe at the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the chains for the touchdown. Showing the toughness for 6.
Cardinals down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right.
Goes to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag.
Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll to the far side.
Oh, now he's going to throw it and score! Throws it to Paytor in the end zone for the touchdown. May thrown his way for the left hand. Was walking out on the run and threw it left-handed. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always. And on tonight's edition of the podcast, it is a recruiting edition of the podcast. For the first time in a long time, the Tar Heels have landed a commitment on the 2027 trail, and we are going to tell you all about him here on tonight's edition of the podcast. We'll go in depth on his breakdown and tell you what he means for Carolina in this class that they are assembling this year. We'll also talk about what it means for the rest of the cornerback targets that Carolina has in this class, some of the top ones that Carolina is looking to get on campus for official visits here coming up. And then, of course, we will take a look at where the class sits as a whole. So it won't be a long edition of the podcast, but are going to get you all that you need to know about Carolina's most recent commitment. And so let's jump right into it. That would be 3-star cornerback Trey Johnson, who comes out of the state of Texas. And this is a big one, Steele High School in Sabelo, Texas. This is one that I think Carolina, probably did not expect that they would be able to jump in on as quickly as they did and end up landing his commitment. They ended up doing an in-home visit with him recently. Armand Hawkins, the cornerbacks coach for the Tar Heels, did go in-home with him on the 15th of May, and that was when he ended up announcing his commitment in the middle of last week. And so it became official. Actually, I think it was Wednesday of last week. So that would be the 13th. The 15th on Friday was when he officially committed. The thing that he pointed to, according to Inside Carolina's interview with him, was the coaches. Of course, Bill Belichick, a big influence there. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, I think, Armand Hawkins, what he's been able to do as a cornerbacks coach has been really impressive. You talk about, some of the recruiting stuff that he's done. Of course, he was the guy that did get in trouble last year for having Thaddeus Dixon's family on the sidelines during a game. But everything else that he's done, for the most part, has been really productive for Carolina. It feels like he's done a pretty good job. I mean, you look at, the success last year, at least early in the season, of Thaddeus Dixon. You look at the success that Caleb Cost had in the nickel. He took a step forward last year. How good Jaden Patterson was in place of Thaddeus Dixon during that injury period. You would imagine that he's going to be a guy that's going to have to take on a lot more responsibility again this year for Carolina. And so he's done a really good job of developing guys. He's done an amazing job of getting guys to commit. Of course, he was the guy that really helped Carolina recruit the state of California, ended up bringing in Jaden Jefferson, who's one of the faster players on Carolina's roster this upcoming season, and did a good job of recruiting some of the cornerbacks that are on this year's roster as well, including one of the top prospects in this class, maybe the top prospect in the 2026 class that Carolina just brought in Kenton Dobson. So he's done a tremendous job, and now you can credit him with this one as well. Trey Johnson, not going to blow you away in terms of the overall recruiting rankings. The number 1,266 overall prospect, the number 121 corner, and the number 156 prospect, 56th prospect, from the state of Texas. He finished last season with 43 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 2 passes defensed. He, is a guy that didn't put up the biggest statistics, but I think a large part of that, this is one of the things that you have to look at when you talk about corners. First of all, you don't want corners having a ton of tackles. If they are, typically that's not going to pan out well, because the reason you're having to tackle a lot of guys is because you're giving up a lot on the outside. That was not what you saw at all with Trey Johnson. I think he's a guy that really wasn't targeted nearly as much as, the other corners on his team. And so it's hard to read into the stats too much. I think you got to look into the film. And the one thing that I will say that was a little disappointing about the film is just the amount of film. It has nothing to do with him. It's just the amount of film that's out there on him. And part of that could be that he wasn't thrown at. That certainly could be part of the reason why. But you would love to get a little more of a feel of what exactly he's bringing to the table. I think that's why you would like to just see a little bit longer highlight tape. I think his was around 3 minutes long. There's some other guys when you go through this. I think the typical length that I usually like to see on some of these tapes, probably like 6 to 8 minutes. You don't want somebody that's putting up literally every snap that they play. There are certain guys that put up 15-minute videos and stuff like that. But at the same time, you do want to have a healthy amount of clips on there. So I'll be interested to monitor what his senior film ends up looking like this upcoming season. But you really, when you look at him, I think, again, you go back to what Carolina is looking for from a lot of these guys. And I think the thing that stands out are the measurables. 6'2", 190 pounds, long, rangy corner. And that's what Carolina is really looking for on the outside, because you look back at some of the guys that they've had in recent years. Elijah Hussey having to play on the outside under 6 foot. That's not necessarily ideal when you're going up against some of these taller receivers. So I think that's one of the main things that we have seen from this staff, is that they have wanted to get bigger in the secondary. They have wanted to find guys with more size, and especially more height. And you see that again with this pickup. I look at him, long, rangy corner that handles himself well in both man and zone coverage. The one thing that really sticks out is how involved and physical he is in the run game. Really, really like that element of his game. And that's one of the things that you really want to see buy-in on, because, there have been guys in the past for Carolina, I won't name names, but there are certain corners that just have no interest in playing the run. They believe that they're firmly out there to, defend against the pass. And in the run game, they really don't necessarily have to fight off of blocks and do the things that they need to do. This guy, you see it pretty often on his film that he's able to fight through some of those blocks. I mean, that's a good portion of his highlight film as well, is him fighting through some of these blocks on run plays and being in the backfield to make tackles. So I really like that element of his game. That's certainly something that Hawkins, I think, is going to be really thrilled with, especially because it shows up not only in the run game, but in the screen defense game. And that's, we know that's a part of the game as well. That's something that teams really have frequented at times on Carolina, because they know that Carolina is not necessarily the greatest tackling team. Really liked what I saw from Johnson in that area as well. I think he's a guy that tackles really well. Also has a high motor, guy that runs down plays when they get downfield, even if it isn't necessarily his play to make. That's something that you really like, is that it's a guy that's going to play at 100% every time that he's out there on the field. And I think that's exactly what you see. He looks natural playing the football. In the limited clips that we see him do that, that's huge, because you just want a guy that doesn't look out of place trying to go up and play the ball, doesn't swing and miss, or, leap and miss, I guess you could call it. When a guy, ends up throwing the ball up deep, you don't want him to miss time his jump or anything like that. That is not a problem by any stretch of the imagination. He does a good job high pointing the football, even if he doesn't come away with a lot of interceptions. I mean, this past year, it looked like he had an interception on his film. Don't know if that was one that was taken away, and that's why it wasn't in his official stats from Max Preps. But certainly a guy that, I think can get better with that as time goes along, but really just does a good job of making sure that he, defends the pass the way that it needs to be, gets his hands on it, and knocks it down. And especially at his size, that's going to allow him to really shine when he's going up, even against some of the bigger receivers that he's going to face at Carolina. The big thing for him is, I think, when you look at where he's ranked as a prospect, it may take him a little bit of time to become a significant contributor in Chapel Hill. But I do think that things that stand out are the measurables and the flashes that he has on film. Those are things that I think Carolina is going to be, that I think they are really excited about, and the reason why they're going to bring him in. I mean, look, in terms of what he looks like, and with the hips and everything like that, looks fine to me. I mean, not anybody that's going to necessarily blow you away, doesn't have the interception numbers that are really going to jump off the page, but I certainly think that he's a guy that can be a serviceable corner for Carolina moving forward. And again, with cornerback, more than a lot of the positions that you have in recruiting. I mean, there are, a few other positions that are like this, but really, you're going to bring in multiple guys at this position group every year, and you're just trying to take multiple bites at the apple. That's what you're trying to do. You'll find some guys that end up being serviceable. Not every single guy that you pick up, not the highest rated players that you pick up are going to necessarily be those guys. But this is one of those guys that I look at and think he can develop over time. I want to see more from him his senior year. I want to see a little bit more of that film, really get more of a feeling for what exactly he's going to be as a player. But what I see right now, and especially, the stuff that you can't teach, the size, I think is certainly something that you should be excited about if you are a Tar Heel fan. Now the question is, how does this affect Carolina with the other guys that they are targeting at this position? And really, I don't think that it really has that much of an effect on the other guys that Carolina is recruiting. I still think that Carolina is going after another commitment in this class, at least one more at cornerback. And I think, when you look at the guys that Carolina is chasing at, it starts with Nathaniel Mensah. This is a guy that Carolina has been on for a while now. This is one of the longer termed offers at this position. And a lot of that is because they have just offered a lot of guys here recently. But Mensah is a guy that just narrowed down his decision here recently. I think it was over the weekend, might have actually been last night. And he narrowed his decision down to two schools. It's going to be either Carolina or Utah that he is going to commit to when it's all said and done. He is a cornerback out of Rancho Cucamonga High School in Rancho Cucamonga, California. And so, this is a guy, another one on the outside, 6'2", 170 pounds, a little bit thinner. So that's certainly something to note there. I think, with the size that you have on Johnson, going to be a little bit more difficult, to fight through him and make plays. If you're, playing some of these jump balls. Mensah a little bit thinner. So that'll be interesting to see if that's somebody that when he gets to college, teams end up putting weight on. But again, not the highest ranked corner that you're going to see. But I do think that Carolina is really excited about possibly being able to bring him in. Carolina is going to get the last shot with him. He does have, what's listed as an official visit to UNLV. But I would imagine that even if he does take that official visit, they are not necessarily going to be contenders based off of what we heard or the post that we saw last night. I believe it was from Rivals, one of the Rivals guys that covers the state of California out there, or covers Utah. I can't remember which one it was exactly, but Carolina the shot on June 19th. That'll be the weekend of June 19th, the final weekend that you can host official visitors for this cycle, I believe. Carolina getting off to a little bit of a late start. You were allowed to host guys in the middle of May here, these last handful of weekends. Carolina waiting until the 29th to really kick off their official visit schedule. But getting the last shot for Mensa, I think, is going to be important. And that would probably be one of the guys that Carolina would look at and have as a priority on their board. Another one is a guy that Carolina just recently started talking to, recently offered in Nazir Pitchford. This is a guy out of the state of Florida, Palmetto High School down there. He is a guy that at one time was committed to Kansas State. He decommitted here recently and now is back on the board, and that's a big part of why Carolina ended up jumping into the running for him. He has a top 4 that he released earlier this weekend as well. So this is a guy that, Carolina is going hard after, has really turned the heat up on since they gave him the offer. I feel like this is one slightly higher rated than Mensa, so could certainly be a guy that Carolina looks at and maybe values just a little bit more. 6'1", 170 pounds. So again, another guy that you would project probably playing on the outside, but Carolina's got a little more work to do here if they're going to end up landing his commitment. They are one of 4 schools, as I mentioned, that are currently battling for him. It's them, UCF, Boston College, and Kansas that will get official visits from him next month. As for Carolina, they will be the team that will go second to last in this recruitment or in this official visit schedule when they host him on June 12th. That will be one of the more important visitors that will be on campus during that time as they look to add yet another cornerback to that room. And so I think, again, just trying to figure out where exactly Carolina has them on the board, I think is going to be the most important thing because, there might be multiple guys that end up wanting to commit. Don't know how many scholarships Carolina is going to sink into this 2027 class. We'll talk about that here a little bit more when we take a look at the class as a whole. And then the other 3-star corner, another guy that Carolina just jumped in on, this one even more recent than Pitchford, would be 3-star cornerback Jaden German, who Carolina jumped in on last week, and he immediately made Carolina one of his top 4 in his recruitment. He's down to Louisville, Minnesota, UCF, and Carolina. Again, all of those schools are scheduled to get an official visit from him here over the course of the next month or so. His schedule beginning like a lot of the schedules are beginning, which is the weekend of May 29th. That's when he will be in Chapel Hill with the Tar Heels. So getting him right out of the gate, a good chance for the Tar Heels to pitch themselves to him. Louisville, a really strong contender for his recruitment as well. They'll go on June 5th, Minnesota on June 12th, and then he'll close out with Central Florida on June 19th. Of course, in terms of the proximity to where he lives, he's from Bishop Verrat High School in Fort Myers, Florida. So he's a guy that is out of the state of Florida. Central Florida, of course, would be the closest team to him. And so they are going to have that hometown advantage. Can Carolina overcome that? Louisville really making a push here as well. And this is a guy that I think probably projects more to the nickel position. And that's another position where, for Carolina, They did get a few guys this past year that they're going to look to play there. One of the more interesting ones is CJ Sadler, whether or not he plays both sides of the ball. But Jaden German, I think, is a guy that Carolina would still value in this class. They still are going to look to add depth there and continue to keep that room pretty well stocked behind Caleb Cost into the future. And so I think he's a guy that definitely is in play, because as of right now, he is the only nickel corner, at least size-wise, the only nickel corner that Carolina is currently involved with at this point. So, Carolina and Louisville, the two latest teams to jump in on this recruitment. So it could end up being a battle between those two down the stretch. It'll be interesting to monitor exactly what goes on. All right. Now we close down this edition of the show by looking at where the 2027 class is as a whole. And the thing that I think I need to stress here to start out with is that a lot of people, this class is nowhere near where it needs to be. Carolina should be recruiting better than this on the recruiting trail. And while I do agree to a certain extent, you've got to remember where this program is at. First of all, the most important thing to remember with this class is that you are coming off of a class where you had 40, or I think it might actually end up being more with some of the late additions that Carolina has had in this class. Of course, Christian Alvarez, a guy that was a late addition along the offensive line. I think there was one other one at the high school level that Carolina added late on. You're talking about bringing in, a good chunk of your roster, almost 40% of your roster this past year or this coming year is going to be true freshmen. And so when you follow that up the next year, there's a good chance that you're not going to be bringing in that many guys because you're going to be so young. Carolina still has a lot of redshirt freshmen that ended up sticking it out as well, that were either holdovers from Mack Brown and stayed committed to Bill Belichick in the 2025 class, or guys that were recruited by Bill Belichick and decided to stay this year instead of entering the transfer portal. So this is going to be an extremely young team that Carolina is going to have this year. And so it means that next year they're not going to be losing a lot of guys. So there's not going to be nearly as many holes to fill. The other thing that I've heard, and I don't know how true this is, I will get more of a feeling for this hopefully as I go throughout the season, and especially if I am credentialed this year. I think this is going to be a team that this year is focused on bringing in high school recruits, really building that foundation that they weren't able to build last year. Next year is the year that Carolina probably looks to compete. And they're frankly going to have no choice, because at some point this staff is going to have to prove that they can compete. They did not get brought in here to get to 6-6 and just barely make bowl games. That's not what the ultimate goal was for this experiment. That's not the reason you went all in and paid the money that you did to not only Bill Belichick, but to his front office and everything that is involved with the program. And so in order to do that, you're probably going to be bringing in a lot of transfers to help you get to that point. And so that's the reason why I don't think you're going to see nearly as many guys committed in this class. And so that is one of the reasons to not panic with where Carolina is at right now. Now, the one thing that you could have as a criticism is that Carolina is not bringing in guys that meet the talent level that you thought they were going to be able to meet. But again, one thing that I would point back to is, how do you really bring in a lot of those guys when you are coming off the type of season that you are coming off of, where it has many around college football questioning what exactly this experiment is for Carolina and if it is going to work. I can't blame anybody that says to themselves, look, I don't necessarily want to join what's going on there right now, because I don't know the stability of that. There's a good chance that if things really go as bad as they did a year ago, and this thing crashes and burns, that Carolina could move on from this experiment after just 2 years. And so it makes sense that some of these top guys may not be wanting to join that. So again, I would say give them a little grace. Let's wait and see if there are some other big names that jump on, because, you look at some of the names that jumped on late last year, they were some decently rated prospects. You had a couple of 4-star prospects, some guys that were borderline 4-star prospects that ended up being 3 stars, that ended up jumping into the fray late. And so maybe that's ultimately what ends up happening here for Carolina. They just haven't been able to convince any of the big names yet to commit, but maybe those guys are eventually coming on the other side. As of right now, Carolina has a 5-man class that they are working with. 3-star safety Chuck Roberts out of IMG Academy, originally hails from Mission Hills, California. You've got Tasheem Butler, the 3-star linebacker out of Glassboro High School in Glassboro, New Jersey. You've got Skylar Robinson, the 3-star wide receiver out of Junipero Serra High School in Los Angeles, California. Pretty sure I absolutely butchered that one there. So I apologize for that. But Carolina's longest tenured commit as a slot receiver for the Tar Heels. And then Isaiah Stevens, the 3-star running back out of Sheridan High School in Sheridan, Arkansas. And of course, the guy that we just talked about, 3-star cornerback Trey Johnson out of Steele High School in Cebillo, Texas. There are some other big names, and we're going to go through a lot of these guys here over the next handful of weeks for you guys that Carolina will be hosting here for official visits. What we're going to do is each week on Thursday night, we are going to prepare you for the upcoming weekend of official visitors. So that will start on May 28th. Will be the first night that we will have an edition of the podcast previewing the upcoming weekend of official visits. So make sure that you guys tune in to those. Those will be on the same channel that you're watching this edition of the podcast. And then in between that, we will be having some talk with some other guys about where the Tar Heel football program stands as a whole. So it's not just going to be all recruiting, but it's going to be very heavy recruiting. And so we're going to keep you up to date with everything that's going on the recruiting trail. Hopefully Carolina is about to start rolling in some commitments here as we go along. We saw that last year when they got to the official visits. That's when you started seeing a lot of guys commit. I mean, it's very rare that you're going to have somebody like Trey Johnson. One thing I didn't mention about him earlier is that he's never even taken a visit to Chapel Hill. He really just fell in love with the connection that he had with the coaches, and really, thought that being a Tar Heel was something that he wanted to do. We'll see if he ends up sticking to that commitment, but you're not going to have a lot of guys that are going to jump in head first like that, especially when you have as many official visits at your disposal as you do now, where I think they're either unlimited or you can have up to 10. I don't remember exactly what the ruling was. It seems like every time there is a ruling with the NCAA, it changes, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I believe it's unlimited official visits that you can take to schools. And so you're going to have a lot of guys that are going to exhaust that chance to go to these schools, really get a feeling for what they do, and then make their decision. So I would expect you will start to see some guys that Carolina is targeting start to commit here over the next handful of weeks and months. So don't panic just yet, guys. I know 55th in the overall rankings, 12th, or not 12th, 14th in the ACC rankings. Not where you would expect this class to be, but there is still time, and you're hoping, I think for this class, the best hope for Carolina, because they're not going to bring in as many guys as they did last year, would be for this to be a middle-of-the-road class this season, and that Carolina really puts their efforts into bringing in guys in the transfer portal prior to the 2027 season so that they can compete to not only make a bowl game in 2027, but potentially to compete for the ACC in that season. That's definitely going to be the goal of the staff. And so we'll be covering all that for you here over the next handful of years on the podcast. So as I mentioned, guys, thing to remember here as we wrap up, those editions of the podcast that are going to be coming up where we preview each week of official visitors. I mentioned that there are going to be some editions of the podcast that are going to be talking about spring practice. Those are going to be mostly interviews. I have reached out to Andrew Jones of Tar Heel 24/7, waiting to hear back from him on exactly when we can get him on. But I expect that to be sometime either this week or early next week. Also have made contact with Bren Renner recently, one of our favorites here on the podcast. And we'll definitely want to have him on. He's got a new podcast that he wants to promote. And so we'll allow him to do that and also come on, talk a little bit about what he saw during the spring with Carolina. Of course, he is one of Carolina's analysts for the Tar Heel Sports Network when it comes to football. So that'll be a really interesting interview for you guys as well that we'll hopefully be rolling out here in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for all of that stuff, guys, here on the Heel Tough Blog YouTube channel, also over on the Facebook page and on the Twitter page. You make sure that you guys are locked in with all of those. You're following those pages, liking those pages, or subscribing if you're over there on YouTube. We're making that push, trying to get to 1,000 here before the start of the season. So if you guys could head over there, help us out, give us a subscription, and make sure that you're keeping up with everything Tar Heel football. Meanwhile, on the basketball side of things, still sort of falling into place here. Alexander Sermadurov is a guy that Carolina is targeting. As of right now, there were some sites that reported he's committed. None of the major sites have reported that. They've actually disputed. So we are keeping you up to date on everything that's going on with that. Any other guys that Carolina may be contacting in the transfer portal, any other staff additions that Carolina has made. They recently made 2, Brian Tabaldi, who's going to be an assistant on the staff, and then Brandon Robinson, who is going to have a place with the team. Not sure exactly what his role is going to be. There's sort of conflicting reports as to whether or not he's going to be an assistant or if he's going to just be a member of the staff, similar to what we see with a guy like Deion Thompson. But we have you guys covered on that front. Josh mostly taking care of that stuff, but occasionally I'll chime in there on that side of things too when it comes to the articles. And of course, we're here on the podcast updating all that stuff. Go back, check out last night's edition of the podcast where we talk Brandon Robinson, Sermadurov, as well as a couple other things around Tar Heel basketball. The schedule was one of the main things that we focused on last night. What do you think about the schedule that Carolina has put together to this point in their first year under Michael Malone? But that is going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening to this edition of the podcast. And as always, go Tar Heels.